The best crossover carbines. What is a crossover carbine? What do I think is important for a crossover carbine? That is a major part of this episode. What I consider important for a crossover carbine. And then what are some great choices for a crossover carbine? That is what we're going to outline today and discuss today here on Gunfighter Life. Saddle up for another episode where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, philosophy, ballistics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to put in a bio because to establish some bona fides for why my opinions might have developed the way that they may have, why you should listen at all. Because you shouldn't just listen to somebody and their advice on something because they have a podcast or because they have a YouTube channel or because they get a gun company to send them a bunch of stuff. They're being paid or influenced to endorse it. Why should you actually care about what I have to say about this stuff? I think that's a valid question. For that reason, I put in the bio. If you've heard it before, skip around 2 minutes. We'll get into the meat of the episode. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as a instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and in some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other 3-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder. Certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life, and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie, where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. So what even is a crossover carbine? Now, here's what it is not. It is not the best battlefield implement of the 20th century. That would be an episode on the best battlefield implements of the 20th century. It's not the best battle rifle of the 20th century. It's not the best assault rifle of the 20th century. It's also not the greatest hunting rifle of the 20th century. It's not those things. Those are specialty things, and by definition aren't a good crossover. Just like the best pair of pliers in the world is not a Leatherman. Like a custom-made pair of channel locks or really good needle nose pliers, they're going to be better than the Leatherman. But a Leatherman is a multifunctional thing. It's pretty good. So I want you to understand that if I say this is a good crossover carbine, I'm not saying it's better as a battlefield implement than an AK-47. Say it's a good crossover carbine for hunting. I'm not saying it's a better hunting rifle than a pre-64 Winchester N270. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's decent as a crossover for both of those things. It can dip its toe into both of those worlds. Right? In that Venn diagram, it's pretty balanced between decent at putting meat on the table and decent at defending oneself from violent encounters. And I'm not talking about battlefield. I'm talking about like break contact, stop a violent encounter. I'm not talking about, World War III. I'm talking about a carbine that is balanced enough to be able to handle medium-sized game relatively well, perhaps not as well as a dedicated medium game rifle, but pretty well. You're not giving up a lot, and a carbine that can handle common violent encounters where you may have the opportunity to introduce a long gun in addition to your EDC, right? Where you may have the opportunity to grab a long gun to stop a violent encounter on you or somebody else. That's kind of what I'm talking about here on the crossover carbine. Not the best at either one of those things, but a pretty good Venn diagram where there's a pretty big middle in between both of those circles. A hunting rifle, a ranch rifle, a truck rifle, and a chips are down defensive tool. That's kind of sums up what I think makes a good crossover carbine. This one specifically, I'm going to keep in the genre of intermediate. If you guys like this and you want me to discuss other genres of crossover carbines, I may. But we're going to keep to the intermediate caliber for this, and you should probably know what an intermediate rifle caliber is. And there probably won't be much debate on the cartridges that I talk about for this, and they're being considered an intermediate rifle caliber. I'm not talking about full powered rifles for this, like a high powered rifle. Like, we're not talking about 300 Win Mag. We're not even talking about 30-06. Likewise, we're not talking about PCCs. We're not talking about PCCs for this. We're talking about in the middle, a good balance of enough firepower, enough manageable recoil, a good intermediate cartridge crossover carbines, because it would just be a lot of different rabbit holes if we went into those. And if you guys want that, maybe I'll do that. Best crossover carbines in a PCC, or better crossover carbines in a full-powered, proper rifle cartridge. Now, let me lay out some characteristics. We talked about what it should be able to accomplish, but what are some good characteristics of these? Number one, rugged. Rugged. Like, you can beat these rifles up. Like, if they drop off the tailgate of the truck, okay, no big deal. If you stick them on the front of the quad and go riding through some pretty gnarly sagebrush or some pretty gnarly greenbrier, depending on your area of operation, not a big deal, right? You're not going to be worried about, oh, my beautiful blued steel gun got a scratch on it. Rugged rifles. The next one, reliable. And you might think they're the same. There's a lot of crossover in that Venn diagram, but not always. A gun can be rugged and not break, but also not feed every single round. Like, it has to have a decent reputation, and there's individuals you could get, this is not a crossover carbine, but you could get a Glock 19 straight from the factory that doesn't work. Yeah, that's a thing. When they make millions of something, you have the possibility that one of those individual units is not going to operate correctly. But in general, this make model of gun has a pretty good reputation for working, and working well, and working most of the time. Being rugged and reliable. None of the other stuff really matters. If the gun doesn't go bang, it's pretty much a heavy, complex melee weapon. So the gun has to be rugged enough to get to the point where you need to use it in austere environments for this. And it needs to be reliable. Like, you have a reasonable degree, and all guns can malfunction. You have a reasonable degree that when you go to shoot that gun and then manipulate it to shoot again, or it manipulates itself to shoot again if it's a semi-auto, that it's actually going to go off. Rugged and reliable. Pretty high on the list here. The next one, and this is really important, fast handling. It needs to be a fast handling carbine. What I would not consider, and wouldn't be on the table anyway because we're talking about intermediate cartridges, and this is a full power, but like a 9130 Mosin Nagant, right? The tactical telephone pole. It's for sure a proven battlefield implement. It's not light, it's not handy, it doesn't handle fast. It is a big, heavy, long rifle. It's not a quick handling carbine. Something like that is out. Even though it may have a decent rate of fire, something like a 300 Win Mag BAR, not the like old school military BARs. I'm talking about the modern sporting Browning automatic rifles in like 300 Win Mag, 7mm Rem Mag. One, they're pretty powerful in those calibers, but a 300 Win Mag version of that gun, I would not consider light, handy, quick handling. And again, not an intermediate cartridge. Now, capacity for most of these, and especially for hunting, probably 3 rounds is enough. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to have more than 3 rounds, settle down. I'm saying for hunting, the vast majority of situations, and there are outliers, there's a time where you've got an animal and you want to get a second round into it. That's pretty common, where you've gotten like a shot on a deer and you want to get another round into it because you have an opportunity to. You've already put 1 round in the animal. I'm a big fan of, especially from my guiding days, if I can get another round in that animal, if it's still on its feet, I'm going to get another round in that animal. There's a lot of practical situations for being able to get a second round into that animal that you're hunting quickly. A third round, much less so than a second round. But it is, and you start going down from that, 4, 5, 6 rounds. If you need the 6th, 7th round on a deer that you've shot, you probably shouldn't have shot it in the first place. I'm just saying. That's pretty rare. So, 3 to 5 rounds for the hunting is plenty. And 5 rounds is kind of marginal because remember, this is a crossover carbine. We're just talking about hunting. Get your bolt action Winchester Pre-64 270. It's fantastic. And it's got like a 5 round capacity. For the crossover carbine, I would consider 5 rounds like a minimum. 10 rounds better. You can get more than 10 rounds and still have a quick, fast handling carbine, fine. And this is not for some litigious thing, for some law thing saying that you should only be able to have only 10 rounds. I'm saying for this, it's pretty practical and probably enough ammunition for what we're talking about. Again, we're not talking about best battlefield implements. And I'm not suggesting that you throw away all your other rifles and only have one of these crossover carbines. I think as a red-blooded American, if you want to own an AR-15, an AK-47, a SCAR-17, you should be able to. We're not talking about what you should legally be allowed to have, so calm down. I'm talking about for practical situations, for a break contact, oh crap, somebody is trying to kill me or somebody else right now, shy of like a battlefield. This is not a battlefield discussion. We're talking about like maybe I went hiking, picking berries out for a short deer hunt before work, and I come back and there's 2 meth addicts breaking into my truck, stealing all my tools, and I go to confront them and they point a gun at me. Those kind of situations, that happen. Right? Those much more common scenarios than, Cuban paratroopers are jumping out of the sky with the Russians and I got to pee in my radiator. I'm saying that could never happen, but I'm saying for more practical, day-to-day, really bad stuff that happens. And really bad stuff happens to people all the time. It's just not in a giant mass scale where it happens to millions of people all at once. But if it happens to you, that's a really, really bad day when you go back to your truck and a bunch of meth addicts are stealing your tools and they point a gun at you. So 5 rounds, absolutely minimum. 10 rounds, better. If you can get more than 10 rounds, that's fine, but in general, you start getting these bigger magazines, and we're talking more towards the battlefield and less handy and quick handling in the woods. In general, or a crossover carbine. Again, if you want the best battlefield rifle, this isn't it. If you want the best hunting rifle, this isn't it. Crossover. So I'm saying between 5 rounds to 10-ish rounds. I really wouldn't want to go any less than 5, and I really talking about like 30 round mags and stuff like that. That's outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. So with those criteria in mind, intermediate cartridge, meaning pretty decent point blank range out to 200 yards, let's say. And you may not even need that. And for that, you may decide you want to go the PCC route. But 200 are 2 football fields. People think of that today as, oh, people can shoot 1,000 yards, 2,000 yards, a mile. Okay, but practically, when's the last time a citizen had a justified shooting at over 200 yards? That's 2 entire football fields. That's a pretty big arena, 2 entire football fields. In most urban environments, in most places east of the Mississippi, in most places where most people live, that's farther than you're probably going to have a shot. 200 meters is a long way. At point blank, I mean, let's say for a human target, like a B-27, an old police qual target, you can aim high center chest on that target and hit that target somewhere acceptably out to 200 meters. Or for a deer, let's call it an 8-inch circle for like a paper plate kill area on your average white-tailed deer. You have to do some adjusting, like you get towards the end of that 200 yards, you may aim a few inches high, but you're still aiming somewhere in that circle and hitting somewhere in that circle. That's what I would consider this 200 meters. And 200 meters is good because it gives you a lot of intermediate cartridges that can do that. You start wanting more than that, you're probably talking about a full-powered rifle cartridge, which is kind of out of the discussion for this. Now, let's talk about rate of fire. Capacity and rate of fire often go hand in hand, but not always. I'm going to specify for this faster than a bolt action, and you can run a bolt action pretty fast. And if you're really good with a bolt action and somebody is inexperienced with some of these other ones, other than semi-auto, which we're going to discuss, you might be faster, you might beat them. But if somebody gives equal practice to both disciplines, I'm going to say the criteria is faster than bolt action. I like semi-auto, but semi-auto may not even be on the table for many people for hunting. If we're talking about legally, we're talking about legally here. I'm not saying I agree with that law, but I'm saying it is. Also, for some people and some jurisdictions, it may throw out a lot of options as far as legally, as far as malum prohibitum, meaning the law says you're not supposed to have it. So, and there's going to be plenty of semi-autos on this list, but not necessarily semi-automatic, although that's probably preferred for me, for this. But faster than a bolt action. If we're talking about bolt action crossovers, I'd be more apt to look at a full powered rifle, something like a scout rifle, because it's got more recoil for sure, but in the time it takes you to manipulate that bolt, you're probably recovered from the recoil of a 308 or something like it. For this, I want to stick to my criteria. You can differ from this. My criteria is faster than a bolt action, up into semi-auto. So rate of fire for this crossover carbine, faster than bolt action, intermediate cartridge, rugged, reliable, a good amount of crossover between chips or down defense, which is I guess the term I'm going to use for this, chips or down defense, not like battlefield, but chips or down defense, like a really, really bad day for a citizen, and good at medium game. We hunt a lot of things here in America, and you may be in an area where there's more elk than deer. This might not be the episode for you, but primarily in America, a lot of people, the primary thing they hunt is deer, and that's not always, but I think Americans as hunters, when you say hunting to somebody, likely, unless they're just a family of, duck hunters or something, likely if you say hunting to the average person, even the average hunter, the first thing they probably think about is deer hunting, and I'm guessing at that, but that's what I would consider true from my experience. Again, not always, but more than anything else. If I say hunting, more people would think of deer than something else first. So we're talking about deer hunting. For most of America, that is white-tailed deer. But any deer-sized, medium-sized game, right? All but the biggest, a black bear. And this also would include mule deer, antelope, wild hogs, black-tailed deer, right, if you're in the Pacific Northwest. Any of the medium-sized game. we're talking about that in the hunting arena. Okay, with that, what do I think are some really, really good choices for best crossover carbines? I'm going to start with the oldest one I consider viable. Maybe not number one on the list for me, but the oldest one I consider viable. The lever action 3030. I would consider that. I would consider that, as far as I am aware, that's still commonly available, America's first intermediate cartridge. Talk about that 200-yard range. Talk about good intermediate power. The 3030 is what I would consider like the first common American intermediate cartridge. Other people may disagree, but that's what I would consider. And I would consider the lever action 3030 to check all these boxes. Rugged, reliable. I mean, there's probably many kicking around that are over 100 years old that are still working. And you can still expect them to shoot the first round, the second round, feed the third round, right? They check those boxes. Rugged, reliable, intermediate cartridge. Really good ballistic intermediate cartridge too, by the way. Capacity, check. Now, different models are going to be different. Capacity, we check that box. The Marlin 336 6+1. And there's it's kind of one of the great rivalries of guns of all time. If we're talking lever action 3030s, there's a big rivalry between the Winchester 94 and the Marlin 336. Now, I think in the Venn diagram, if you talk about a defensive carbine, likely I would rather have a 94. I think they handle it a little bit better. If you're talking about a hunting carbine, the 336. And there are exceptions, right? There are several models of the Winchester 94 where you can mount optics, but it's kind of a workaround. The open top receiver of the original design does not lend itself well to that. The closed flat top receiver or flat-ish top receiver of the Winchester 336 lends itself much better to the mounting of modern optics. But either one of those would be a good choice, or any of the copies, right? The patent's expired. There's a lot of companies that are jumping on the bandwagon. Lever actions are seeing kind of a resurgence. But the Winchester Model 94 family, the Marlin 336 family, like 3030 quick handling lever action carbines, they would be like the oldest tech for this that I would consider for a good crossover carbine, right? They've been used by law enforcement. Not today. I mean, I'm not aware of any agency still using a lever action 3030, but they were kind of, and calm down at this, but they're kind of the assault rifle of their day, predating, common semi-auto box-fed battlefield weapons. They have a decent capacity, especially for the time. We're talking about, the Winchester 94 was named for 1894. Came out in 1894. It's a good crossover carbine. The 3030 is good ballistically as an intermediate cartridge. Not a full power rifle cartridge, but it's a fantastic intermediate cartridge. It checks all the boxes. So, Marlin 336, Winchester Model 94, 3030 carbine. I think a good modern optic is a good force multiplier. I'd still want backup iron sights, but I would consider a lever action 3030 to be the oldest of the technology on this list that's still viable today. It wouldn't be my first choice for a deer rifle, but it's pretty high on the list, to be honest, for a lot of kind of hunting that I do. It wouldn't be my first choice in a gunfight. It'd be a lot higher up than just a handgun. So, it's a good crossover carbine. The next one, and this was kind of the go-to redneck hunting rifle when I was growing up. Not because it was the best deer hunting rifle, because they were cheap and people were poor in the rural area where I was from, and people hunted deer, maybe not always legally, but they hunted deer to put meat on the table. So ethically, I don't have much of a problem with it. There's a lot more deer now than there was then, so that obviously didn't destroy the deer population. East of the Mississippi, I've heard it said, multiple sources, that there's more deer now than when Columbus landed. But growing up at the time, this was like the poor man's hunting rifle. I don't know that I ever saw like a pre-64 Winchester. Like, who could afford that, right? I'm talking about, I still remember seeing corn husk mattresses and outhouses, right? To give you an idea, we were pretty poor. We didn't have a phone for a time, and I remember walking with my mom when I was a pretty young kid, but I still remember it, like walking into the nearest town miles to use a payphone to call my grandma, her mom. Right, just to give you an idea, like there wasn't a lot of money kicking around. If you were spending, even back then, all that money on a pre-64 Winchester to hunt deer, you were doing it as a luxury, as a sport, not to put meat on the table. If you're doing it for a financial reason, I didn't even hunt deer with that. I had a hand-me-down bolt-action 410 and then later a single-shot 20-gauge shotgun that I would hunt all manner of beasts with, including deer. But if you had a rifle, a lot of times it was an SKS because they were cheap back then. I mean, even for the time, crazy affordable. And the ammunition was affordable, and it's not the best deer hunting carbine, but a lot of poor redneck put deer in the freezer with an SKS. And it was designed as a battlefield rifle, right? It was designed by Russia as an infantry rifle. And Russians, the commies, I don't agree with their politics, right? I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that they do, but the commies make a fine rifle. They've made some of the best rifles in history. SKS is a good rifle, and although the AK is a better battlefield rifle, the SKS is a better crossover carbine. It handles to me like a traditional hunting rifle. And it's semi-auto. It's in a fantastic intermediate cartridge, the 7.62x39. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and hunt deer with full metal jacket, but there's a lot of really good hunting ammo now available in 7.62x39. It is a good intermediate cartridge. Even though they've gone up a lot in price, I still think they're undervalued. I think if you made a rifle of that quality today, with that degree of craftsmanship, with that degree of, you talk about like a rifle that epitomizes rugged reliability, maybe only second to the AK-47 in repeatable firepower, it's the SKS. It's rugged, it's reliable, it's got a great intermediate cartridge, and I think it's still undervalued. Again, if you made one of those today, I reckon it would cost upwards of $1,000. Although they're not as cheap as they used to be, you can find a good SKS, a good Chinese, a good Russian SKS for less than $1,000 at the time of this recording in the year of our Lord 2024 in the month of May. That may change, right? I still think they're really undervalued. But if you don't do a bunch of space junk crap to them in tactical amount and try and make them take detachable box magazines, you just leave them with a good, rugged, reliable magazine that they have, a good 10-round magazine that you can load with stripper clips, right? It was designed as a battlefield weapon. It's got a good rate of fire. It's got decent capacity. It's got a good intermediate cartridge. It's rugged and reliable. It's good the way that it is. It has good sights as it is. The AK is a good battlefield weapon. I'm not going to argue that it's not better than the SKS, but as a hunting carbine, if you said I had to go deer hunting to put meat on the table, I would take an SKS over an AK-47. It's more tailored for that. It was designed to be a rifle replacement, whereas as I understand it, I wasn't there at the time, but the SKS was designed to be a submachine gun replacement. I don't want a submachine gun for hunting deer, I want a rifle. And the SKS was designed to be an intermediate rifle, a replacement as an infantry rifle. I think it has better sights. I think it handles better for that kind of quick handling carbine than an AK-47. Not equal on the battlefield, but a better crossover carbine. The SKS is a fantastic choice. The one thing that really cripples it is that, and it's not a fault of the gun at the time, because guns at the time really weren't designed to take optics, but it does not lend itself well to optics. There are ways to mount optics on an SKS, but it's kind of a workaround. It's not a good, I've never seen a really good, solid way to mount good optics on an SKS. The iron sights are decent, so if you just want iron sights anyway, it's a fantastic option. But the one thing it really lacks is the ability to mount good modern optics. Right, getting back to if I was just going to hunt deer and put deer on the table, I would probably rather have the Marlin 336 with a good LPVO mounted on it than an SKS. But if you throw me into that meth addict breaking into my truck scenario, then the odds flip towards the SKS. So again, what are you primarily interested in? But both of those. And the SKS is a phenomenal A bit dated with the inability to mount optics, but a phenomenal crossover carbine. And although they're not as cheap as they were in days of yore, they are still, I think, vastly underpriced. So, and I don't see them getting any cheaper. Unless there's some giant Cold War stockpile that we haven't found yet. I don't see a ton of those coming on the market. You may see a few trickle in here or there. Could be wrong about that, but I think the days of the, sub $200 SKS are over. And I still think they're undervalued today at the time of this recording. So if you see a good deal on one and you've wanted one, it's a good practical carbine, right? Not everything has to have M-LOK to be practical. And the next one I'm going to discuss is probably my favorite and most practical modern one on the list. And that is the Ruger Mini 30. Put it right up there with any of the ones we talked thus far. If you said you're going out to put venison in the freezer for your family, it's not the best hunting rifle ever, but of all the ones on the list with a good LPVO mounted on it, a good low power variable optic mounted on it, yes, I would. In most places that most people live and hunt. Now, I live right now in the vast, high, lonesome prairies. A lot more wide open. But even so, I wouldn't feel that hindered going out and hunting pronghorn antelope with it. It wouldn't be my first choice. Again, I'm not saying it's as good as a pre-64 Winchester and 270. But it's not a bad choice. Now, I've only ever gotten one antelope. I put in for another tag this year. Hopefully I get drawn. Put in for a meat tag, a doe tag. But the one, and I've seen a lot of antelope, but the one antelope that I've taken, I took it 150 yards. I think that same day or very close to that, I saw one even closer that I could have shot. But for most places, especially east of the Mississippi, Ruger Mini 30. You might be familiar with the Mini 14, but I would take the Mini 30. The Mini 30, much like the SKS, is in 7.62 by 39. It's a better intermediate cartridge for what we're talking about today, in my opinion. Now, if you're talking about, like, I have a ranch on the Mexican border in South Texas and New Mexico, right, and I mostly want it for the defensive aspect and coyotes. I want to be able to take out a coyote or a badger. Then that's different. That's not really in the spirit of today's episode. In that case, the Mini 14 in 5.56 would be a fine choice. But I'll be honest, right now, if I had a ranch on the Mexican border, I'd probably lean more towards an actual battlefield rifle, and I'd forego the better hunting aspect of it, and I'd go more towards an actual battlefield weapon, because that's more like legit conflict zone, I think, on the border right now than the spirit of the episode today. But let's go back. I would choose the Mini 30 over the Mini 14 in the vast majority of circumstances. That's not a bad rifle platform. Actually, maybe one of the last generations that used those in actual boots-on-the-ground missions. Talked about I had more specialized assignments and stuff in law enforcement. I had access to full auto, like M16s, Car 15s, M4 style rifles. I had access to submachine guns, all kinds of stuff. I also had access to Mini 14s, just plain old, like they may have been made for the police or whatever, but they weren't full auto. They were just Mini 14s. Very similar to what you could buy at Walmart. And a lot of times I would just take the Mini 14. It's a good, quick-handling carbine. It's not a bad rifle. Not for everything. For some things, I did want that full-auto Car 15. But for many things, it's a decent patrol rifle. Now, the Mini 30, I think, is even better. Talking about an intermediate cartridge. For this. For some applications, I would want a 5.56. But for this, we're talking about deer-sized game. I think for deer, and I know, and I've been a guide, and I've seen people hunt with it. I know that a 5.56 223 is capable of taking deer. I would call it absolutely, positively, barely, marginally acceptable for that. Whereas I would call a decent hunting round, not a full metal jacket, but a decent hunting round in 7.62 by 39, completely adequate. Not great, but adequate. Adequate for that. It's a better cartridge for what we're talking about today. The Mini 30 is a good rifle. Unlike a lot of the options we've talked about, not only is it capable of mounting modern optics, there's a lot of really good mounting solutions for it, and it comes with scope mounts. It comes with good modern, I believe, 1-inch scope mounts. You can mount a good loop-holed LPVO right on it. Like, get it mounted properly, use a proper torque wrench and stuff, but it comes with the rings. You put a decent loop-holed, VX Freedom LPVO on it, it's an easy solution with really good modern optics. You want to go the red dot route? That's fine. You mount a red dot on it. They make really good rail adapters for a good modern rail for the Mini 30 carbine. Also, unlike anything we've talked about so far, except for some older models not made anymore of the 336, a very, very rare model of the Winchester 94, is the only one widely available in stainless steel. And if you've listened for any length of time, if you can go stainless steel, in my opinion, almost always go stainless steel. If you use guns like I do, if you beat up guns like I do, stainless steel if you can. You can get a Ruger Mini 30 7.62x39. Get ones that scream tactical, but you can get ones that look like a more traditional rifle, and they're still very capable. They're kind of my number one choice for this, for a modern, with modern optics, best Venn diagram in the middle crossover carbine. Ruger Mini 30, stainless steel, wood stock, polymer stock, you do you, whichever one you want, 7.62x39. Good deer hunting carbine, good medium-sized game hunting carbine with a good optic, rugged, reliable, be good on the front of a quad, be good in the back of a truck. Good again, you get anything deer hunting, you're coming out of the woods and you see those meth addicts breaking into your truck and they point a gun at you, right? It's not an AK-47, but it's a lot better than your handgun, a lot better than a strictly really good deer hunting rifle. It's a good crossover carbine. And I think they're kind of underrated, the Ruger Mini 30. I don't think a lot of people even, they're kind of building up their battery and they want a good kind of all-around carbine. They're maybe looking at, should I get a this or that? And it kind of flies under the radar. It's a fantastic crossover carbine, which is kind of the spirit of the episode today. It's Ruger Mini 30, stainless steel, LPVO or red dot, 7.62x39. It checks all the boxes and it does it well. It's a good rifle. Anyway, with that, that's kind of going to wrap up the main points of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you want me to talk about more of like a crossover PCC, you want a little bit less power, you're like Tim the Toolman Taylor, more power, and you want the full powered rifle kind of crossover, then let me know. Maybe I'll do that too. But anyway, with that, your tactical tip of the day. I've mentioned these before. One of the patrons, the old patrons, actually turned me on to this. I've talked about them before, but not for a long time. Kind of a good crossover for this. Kind of more stability, not strictly a target thing, not strictly a long range thing, not strictly a hunting thing, but kind of that good in the middle. The Rhodesian sling. You look up what a Rhodesian sling is. There's a company that makes web ones now. Forgive me if I don't remember. You can get leather ones. You can get, like ballistic nylon type slings. Whatever your flavor is, whatever you prefer. Make some really, really good Rhodesian slings. And it's kind of a sling concept. You can make your own. I've actually made several. I bought one and I've made several for myself. But once you get the idea and the concept of a Rhodesian sling, and I also really like the old web slings, but those Rhodesian slings kind of fit really handily for what we're talking about today. So if you're not tracking on the Rhodesian sling, look one up. I'm not saying it's always the best solution for you, but I'm saying for this, I would almost always take one over like, one of the old school hunting Cobra slings. I would consider those, that's like if you stand hunt, which I really don't like to, and you're going to walk 40 yards to your deer stand and sit down, then the Cobra sling is fine. For what we're talking about today, you might really take a look at the Rhodesian sling. Buy one, make one, whatever. Braid one out of 550 cord if you want. Put a compass on it. But the Rhodesian sling, check out that concept. It's a pretty cool one. Your tactical verse of the day. How about a good crossover verse? And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God. You'll find that in 1 Samuel. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.